some level of I can't even say it now, it's ridiculous. Some level of obfuscation. Yeah, that's it, isn't it? Please reassure me. Tell me
obfuscation, I'm with you. Yeah.
I am, and in many ways have always been, an immigrant. I may owe my existence to colonialism, but I was the first post-colonial child in my family, the first one to be born Angolan. As civil war struck, my parents and I fled to Portugal. I guess technically we were refugees, but the former motherland never labeled us as such. We were instead returning. The sense that I'd come from somewhere else was not just ingrained in my identity, but also something life would never allow me to forget. I moved to England at a time in history when doing so was essentially moving from one area of the European Union to another. I have now lived here longer than where I was raised, that place where my thoughts were shaped. Life still insists on reminding me that I come from somewhere else. My name is João Paulo Simões, and this is The Matter of Migration, a podcast where voices from elsewhere discuss the here and now, never forgetting what came before, so that together or individually we can reach a better place. For context, we're recording this third episode of the podcast on Wednesday the 16th of July 2025. My co-host is Alex Rajinder Mason. Alex is a researcher and project manager who specializes in racial justice, the arts, and community partnership work. He currently runs the Center for Equity and Inclusion, based at University of Sheffield, which collaborates with activists, artists, community leaders, researchers, and students to address structural racism within higher education and co-develop decolonial processes for generative, nurturing, and liberational collaboration. He is also the co-director of Dig Where You Stand, a local community interest company which takes artists into the archives to unearth untold stories about global majority communities in South Yorkshire. As part of the South Asian diaspora by way of India, Kenya, and now Britain, Alex is passionate about using the arts to explore racial heritage and regularly organizes events that platform important work in this area. Welcome to the podcast, Alex.
Thank you very much for having me.
You and another one of our guests, your names made it to the funding bid for the Arts Council of England to fund this project. So you were already kind of like top of the list for...
no pressure.
No pressure. But this was via Sam Holland, the co-producer. We had the theme for the episode, but he highly recommended you to be a co-host. And one of our guests was also sort of highlighted name that made its way to the final funding bid. And I will explain why the other guest is here when we get to her. So, would you like to introduce our two guests?
Yeah, I'm very excited to have the two guests here. I've worked with both of them on different projects. First of all, we have Ella Barrett, who is a community archivist and producer based in Sheffield, whose work blends oral history, installation art, and community-led storytelling. She is the lead curator at the Bantu Archive Programme and co-director of White Teeth, an audiovisual practice with artist Jashan Walton. Her practice explores Black and POC life, memory and place through archival research, sound, and moving image. Ella has collaborated with organisations including Site Gallery, Arts Catalyst, Sheffield Doc Fest and Worldwide FM, as well as community collectives such as Sedaka, Gut Level and Dig Where You Stand. And I'm also very happy to have Regina Solis Miranda. Regina is a Sheffield-based Guatemalan with a deep sense of the territory that birthed her. She is an educator and anthropologist specialising in cultural narratives and Latin American studies. For the last 10 years, she has been spanning social research, education, cultural production and community building. Regina is particularly interested in understanding and reimagining identities through popular culture and art. Since March 2024, she's been co-running a monthly book club for women around Sheffield.
So I think we should start with what the connection between everyone really is. And I think you three all connect via Dig Where You Stand. So maybe, Alex, you could tell us a little bit about what that project is.
Yeah, absolutely. So we prefer to go with the phrasing of archival justice movement as opposed to project, really as a show of intention about this being a long-term intervention. So as a group, we go into local archives and we uncover the hidden heritage of racially marginalized communities or global majority communities who have been in, worked in, passed through South Yorkshire over hundreds of years. And quite importantly, we focus on stories typically before 1945 because we're trying to confront the modern migration narrative, which typically starts 1948 and onwards, as if no global majority people came to Britain before then. I should say as well that whilst this is a movement that involves a lot of different people, it was founded by writer Desiree Reynolds during an artist in residency at Sheffield City Archives. And from that point of her trying to find shows of black life within those archives, it's grown to become something that has commissioned dozens of artists to respond creatively to the archival source material that we find in the archives and then to present them in a range of events and exhibitions. Because the other thing, it's not just about discovering the stories, we're really keen to grant as many people access to those stories as possible, particularly those from marginalised groups, and we employ arts to do that. And that's to some extent how we've met with Regina and Ella. They've been part of that journey and part of that effort to get these stories out of the archives and into the public forum.
Great. Ella.
Hi.
Go.
I had like one of those very rare like Saturdays where I just didn't have anything to do, so I was like mooching around and I completely forgot, but it was the exhibition that was at the cemetery. That was in 2022 and it was so profound. It was like being in this like a little chapel, isn't there?
Yeah.
And the exhibition encompassed like the parameters of the room, poetry, and then your like boards, almost like prompts to what they mean and what just looking in the archives for like marginalised communities mean. Yeah, and it was so beautiful. I've kind of been on fangirl kind of since then really. And then last year as White Teeth, we produced three or four videos about the archival material. You have to remind me, Alex, it was so, I feel like I've done so much.
You were talking about the Indian Ayah.
Yeah, unnamed Ayah, yeah. We had to make it for a younger audience as well. So that was interesting as well, because I think with archives, they are quite intimidating, they're quite institutional spaces. A lot of the time you do have to have a certain level of understanding of how to navigate it. So taking that information and like thinking like, okay, like if we're giving this to like children or as an education tool, like how do we present it? Which I guess in a way was kind of a creative response in itself, because it really was looking at the issues of archiving alongside the storytelling aspect of it and piecing it together.
Great, yeah. Regina, your background as an anthropologist makes you particularly interesting to me to be part of this conversation.
Good.
But also from that perspective, perhaps your reaction to Dig Where You Stand and your involvement, how much that informed your involvement in it.
Yeah, well, I remember that in November, I think last year, you guys launched like the open call for the new training program for women of colour here in Sheffield. And I was like, well, that's interesting, because I had been thinking about unearthing the history of Latin American people here in the north of England, because you don't really see a lot of it. And I just thought, well, this program is offering me the chance to sort of go to the archives. As you were saying, Ella, it's quite intimidating us at first if you haven't done it in the past. And there's like a system and it can be a bit overwhelming. So doing that with a bunch of women of colour seemed like the perfect opportunity for me to engage with that curiosity of mine. To be honest, I met some amazing women who I'm still in touch with, and we're like, I don't know, conspiring a little bit to come up with cool stuff. Yeah,
there was a very interesting chemistry when you did your presentation at the Migration Matters Festival, understanding each other and respecting each other. That was really interesting. The reason why I thought of you to be a guest here and not, I suppose, any of the other really interesting participants, it was all due to how you responded to the assignment. In a way, it was very vulnerable, but it takes a lot of strength to be that vulnerable in public. You were the one that felt that was the bravest in that sense, and the images you chose to project as well took us on a journey, and that actually has a direct connection in my mind with what I think the title of this episode is. A place untouched by time. The immediate interpretation is perhaps that we are referring to a specific place, and in my own experience as an immigrant is that the place that I came from lives in my mind, that it is untouched by time, even though when I go back it feels different. I notice the differences first and foremost.
And you change as well, and you go back and you're not the same person that you were when you first left.
Exactly. So I thought that you expressed that in a way that was very very pure, and I really appreciated that, and that's why you're sitting over there.
Well, through all of the workshops that we had at Where You Stand, we generated something at the end. We wrote a lot, and it pushed me to write a bit more in English, which is something that I hadn't done that much in the past, to explore those feelings that I had been feeling and trying to use the sensitivity that I use when I write poetry in Spanish, trying to sort of bring those images and metaphors into English. And it also pushed me to dig into my family archives. Even as I was going through the footage, I sent them some mini clips of what I was looking at, and they were so moved by it, even like my siblings. And it started a whole conversation as a family. And Ella, I'm guessing like you, through your work through archives, you've seen like the effect that going through archives has in a community, in a person, in an individual, and how it triggers like a collective response.
Definitely. I think a lot of the time when I do like the oral history interviews, a lot of people, they always say, oh, it's like therapy. And sometimes I'm like, oh gosh, I don't know if this is good or bad, but I think it's almost because they're able to reflect and talk about something that they don't always get asked. I think the beauty of community archiving is the everyday person. When they talk about their life, there's so much interesting things that they've done that it's important for them to share it. And like going back to, like you said, like a place untouched by time, I think the community centre where I work at, so like definitely has that quality. I think people in the community, their houses have that. It's like very communal, and there's a lot of like cultural heritage there that needs to be kind of shared and disseminated a lot of the time.
Yeah, question that I've been thinking about a lot recently is what draws people to the archives initially. And I was thinking about what took me to dig Where You Stand. And actually it wasn't so much the drive towards the archive as it was about grassroots community engagement and preserving of the important stories that haven't necessarily had the space to be documented, preserved in a way that allows the community to lead on that. The alternative normally is that an institution will seize upon it, store it and use it as they like. And what I saw happening with Dig Where You Stand when Desiree initiated it 5 or so years ago was this absolute direct connection to communities, and also her conviction that the everydayness that Ella was just talking about was the thing to be focusing on. One of the first lines that she comes out with is, this is not about kings and queens, it's about ordinary working class people doing normal everyday activity. That just really resonated with me because my research has been in race, higher education and the arts for a long time. And when you try and make grand analyses of how race operates within a country, you lose the individual complexity that happens on the ground. And I think as the years have gone on, I've felt a real disconnect with the theory to the ground level. And Dig was really hitting it on the ground level. That's something that, Ella, obviously you've been doing with your oral history and the Bantu archive. Is there anything that has struck you in doing this work over now quite a few years with community about the sort of stories that they share, and anything in the connection that happens between you as archivist asking the questions and them as not only residents but your own community, really?
Yeah, I think when I first started, there was just like the source material, because obviously with doing a history degree you need like a level of source material to like look and analyse, etc. And there was just like nothing on like the local community. It was just like completely absent. And there is things obviously within Sheffield archive, but it felt like a collection. It didn't feel very personable at times. So like talking to like the community, they understood like the need to like preserve our stories. It is hard work because you have to be there and you have to be that face. You have to be kind of like around and present, which obviously you don't get paid for. It's like more of an energy and it's more of a presence. I think we had this conversation, Alex, because someone wanted to use the archive for an exhibition and I was a bit dubious, and so I asked all the members of the archive and they like really wanted to do it. And that's the thing, like it's not my archive. I work almost like for the community to preserve how they want their voices to be amplified, almost like I'm like a channel through kind of like doing that. It is interesting because I don't really like to work in institutional spaces all the time, but like I said, you really have to work with people and be that person there to navigate it and help them and work together to tell people's stories. It really has to be like an inclusive one. I guess like staying true, like you said about like the idea of Dig Where You Stand as a movement, I think you just have to like stay true and work with people that have that same like idea of where they want it to go and how to do it in the most ethical way, because I think with oral history there's like big like ethical questions at times. Yes,
it's a lot of weight to carry though, the responsibility of doing that work ethically, but also you said you're a vessel, so those stories which are full of all sorts of not just traumas but certainly huge moments in the life of an individual and a community, if you're the vessel, they're running through you.
Yeah,
that's a lot to negotiate.
The matter of migration has been conceived and developed alongside a physical safe space in which the public can immerse itself. This multisensory installation has been designed and crafted by artist Liz von Graevenitz, informed by a series of workshops with specific groups, and will itself migrate between community spaces across the city of Sheffield, the original city of sanctuary.
It's magical when you just ask people about themselves, especially people that have been historically marginalized and that live in a system that's completely oblivious of their needs and their context and what they go through like every day. Just giving people the space to highlight what they feel is relevant about their own experience without necessarily framing them in this narrative of trauma is so important, especially now with the global conversation. It tends to focus on like the traumatic experiences of that journey. But literally, as you were saying, there's so much joy in community. And sometimes I hate the word resilience because like, why do we need to be resilient for? We shouldn't have to be fighting against this. But resilience, as it is, like overcoming those hardships and relying on their communities and just giving people the opportunity to open up and to even reflect on things. Just have a pause. Like life goes too fast, man. So like just having a pause to think about what you've done, to think about where you've been, the people that you've met. I think it's magical, and I think that's like a beautiful space to build community and to allow people to recognize the good and the bad about their stories and their journeys. Obviously, my background is in anthropology, so you sort of learn how to navigate those conversations, and you learn that silence, as you were saying, can be strategic. So allow them to like just unload what they need to unload at that moment and highlight what they need to highlight. And yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, but in relation to that, there's a point that I would like to highlight. I don't know you very well, but my perception of you is that we're talking to someone really full of empathy. And how do you negotiate the skills that you have as an anthropologist? Be slightly removed and give space, but also feeling. You obviously feel things very deeply.
I think over like my life, I've been blessed to be able to collaborate in community spaces, both in my home country and here in Sheffield. And I just like talking to people. That's one of the reasons why I studied anthropology. I'm just a curious person, and I'm curious about how we build our cultural cues and why we grant meaning to the things that we grant meaning. Sometimes as an immigrant, with that empathy and with that sense of culture in itself, it can be a bit energetically draining, I'm not gonna lie. Being aware of the differences and why people are behaving a certain way, and it's like you can't unsee it. And I'm constantly asking questions to my partner, and he's like, mate, I do not know. Like, I can't tell you, you're asking the wrong person. But yeah, just that exercise of listening. I think we're not taught to listen in this society. Just having those conversations, it's like, all right, so I'm gonna take this in and I'm going to process it. And that's a little bit of the work that I feel like Dig Where You Stand does. It gives us this information, I listen, and then after each workshop I just had to write something just to like allow you to process those stimuli. So yeah.
Yeah, the interesting thing in relation to how the conversation is going now, but going back again to Migration Matters Festival and your presentation, is that in some ways you were highlighting the difference between the archive and the oral history. They can complement, but they are definitely two different things. But still, your work with the archives relied on the oral to be presented. But also, I felt like a kind of, as it was finishing, experience itself of listening to you, it was so ephemeral. I felt like a quiet mourning, that it was not registered or recorded in some way, or, you know.
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like I always like call myself kind of like a community archivist, but I feel like I'm not. I feel like I do more documentation, and then especially with White Teeth is like very much like just using like archival like footage. It's hard to think about where you find yourself now, I think, in the archive, and how will the archive see us, how will we be remembered, and what kind of channel will that be? So I think, to be honest, it's documenting someone's life or someone's community, but it is now ready for the future, I think. And also I think the amount of money that archives charge to like give you film, and when it's film of your community and they're charging you so much money, I just think it's like awful. That really influenced White Teeth to kind of like look at this idea of documenting like Sheffield and documenting like marginalised communities in Sheffield like now. I think like social media in this like digital age is, I think we lose things. I think that's why we always use film, because you have like a certain amount of time and you have to then process it and develop it, and there's that process and that journey of getting the material that I think it's important. I think it's quite sacred at times, whereas when it's so accessible, which is like great for a lot of things, you lose the importance of like what you've actually captured.
Not just in digital, like in analog as well.
Yeah,
right? Like
absolutely.
Write your diaries, write your feelings down. Like, I don't know, take pictures, print the pictures, not just keep them on your phone. I don't know, like who knows who's going to find that in the future? Who knows we're going to pass it on to? And it might inform something.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I've been reflecting on as you've all been speaking, that distinction I made earlier between the oral histories and the more focused archival work, is the inability to have a straightforward dialogue with the characters, I suppose, being explored, in that we're looking at people from pre-1945. So you're really left with the source material and not much more. And the way in which that source material is often being gathered and collected, it frames those people in very particular, restricted, reductive ways. And one of the things we've had to work quite hard to do then is to not reduce those people to those kind of simplified narratives that are often very trauma-led. For example, you're likely to be in an archive as a person of colour because there's some sort of criminal record that we can point to, or you died early, and we've really strived to find a point of connection that brings out the complexity of that person, the full humanity of that person, and art has been our way of doing that. Art plus lived experience, I suppose, because actually we're closer to those individuals than it might appear, because whilst we're not sat opposite them asking them the questions and getting a sense of the vibrancy of their life, we are part of an ancestral line, whether that's specifically that racial or ethnic lineage, or just as other members of a diaspora. We can connect on that point to some extent and ask then pointed questions of the material that we're sitting with, and use art to bridge that gap, I suppose, which is not about allowing that source material to speak because we can't assume to know its voice, but it is to offer from what we can see in the source material, what we can gauge from our own experience and this artistic sensibility, I would say, to present what could be possible for them, and to do so in a nuanced enough way that it feels like it could be true.
Yeah, I feel like there are certain images and certain words that I use when I write in Spanish that I really struggle to find in English. I try to write from a very simple place. I want a child to be able to understand what I'm saying. A simple, tender story. I feel like we tend to speak from the wound, and it's completely valid and it's completely fair if that's where you're at. But from my experience, I feel like I've gotten so much more from like trying to look further, recognizing that trauma, recognizing that wound. But how do I build from that? Like, where do I go from there? Is that where I want to stay? And try to reflect that in whatever it is that you're creating as well too. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, to be honest.
Yeah, no, but it touches upon language, which was something that I wanted to talk about. So that's perfect. But you did mention that wrestling with the two languages and what comes more natural and more unmediated. And that's the thing as well. In terms of the archives are in English. So there's that. There's the attributes of the language itself. It's a language that invites for a certain way of, although it's immensely versatile, it's also quite restricting if you come from a place that is, I'll just say it, that is more honest, because it's a language that in itself invites kind of like some level of obfuscation. I can even say. Also the way interactions are structured and the whole idea of being polite and everything is always slightly clouded. How much do you feel restricted by if it's not your first language, or that you feel like it's maybe in terms of the archives that it's sanitized the past a little bit, or also like that it lacked in self-awareness, that how much it was exposing the society back then?
The issue that I think in reference to your question was when I worked at the Fairground Archive and it was the cataloguing. That is like so problematic, the way in which you catalogue archival material, especially if it's people of colour. The language at times is really harmful. I feel like you know this definitely, Alex, like even the work that Digaway Stens has worked with. You can just tell it's not done with care. And I don't mean care from an archival way, because it definitely has been like organised and catalogued in a way that's super on it in regards to the standard, but not care from looking actually at the community in question and their histories and the language and the kind of the personification of them. So I think that is like a massive issue. When you are trying to create an archive that's very decolonial in practice, how does that match with the theory of these super Western and super institutional ways of cataloguing, which are quite problematic actually? The idea of like immigrants or like people of colour having to work twice as hard, I feel like in archives you do have to work twice as hard because you're going through a system and a catalogue that actually isn't kind of speaking to you.
That's a very, very strange sensation in the archives of having to put yourself in the mindset of a white archivist, probably a male in say 1920 or earlier. How would they have understood this person and this story? Because these stories are not just there. You have to go and dig for them. What would their mindset have been? And therefore, what would their narrative framing have been for that particular source material? You have to go through that to have any chance of finding the actual person or story that you're looking for. To get to that, you have to engage in quite a violent, intellectual, but ultimately then emotional exercise of confronting this colonial framework, really. You then have to translate that, so you get behind it to find the person, and that's really difficult. So it's all in the English language. In terms of those British sleights of hands, you know, in terms of this politeness that really obfuscates, I'll try it, obfuscates a much more harmful dynamic that's being built. Desiree, when she first started the residency, she sent a letter around to the Sheffield City Archives and she said, I don't want to hear the phrase, it was of its time, because for her, that's a very institutional sleight of hand that shuts down conversation about harms done. Every era has had points of resistance. So in that time, there would have been people we know saying that's wrong. That's not how you should frame it. So for you to say it's of its time is to not only be very selective with whose mindset you're referencing there, but also really what you're trying to do is not engage with the conversation that's being started. And that was a very direct confrontation of language, and perhaps it's something that runs through all colonial archives, you know, outside of Britain, but it is a very British thing to shut down things through sleights of hand that, unless you're attentive to, kind of experienced in, is very easy to get in a tangle. Again, goes back to the intimidation factor. Where do you even start when you have all of these things you have to come up against just to find a story? And hopefully, you know, that's sort of the role that Dig is trying to play, is that mediation role. And it's amazing to hear the feedback on the Migration Matters event and other aspects of the Creative Workshop series and other things, because we're so invested in these stories in the archive, but it is also a point of trying to bring together people now to try and tell stories that are happening now and to hold that in conversation with these things we're finding in the archives. It's sort of a collapse of time in a way, you know, sort of bring that past and present together, and within that there's some future inherently. I think, Regina, you were talking about hope and optimism, and the thing that I return to is this idea that the liberated future that we're all striving for is already in existence in those everyday acts and rituals of care that I think were mentioned earlier, particularly amongst marginalised communities. There are all sorts of liberated ways of being. That is the future. But I think this collapse of time allows us to touch on it a bit more, because the future then isn't something in front of you that you're just sort of gliding towards. It's here and it's there to be fought for and to be brought out. And I don't know how to phrase this in a way that's answerable, but I did want to chat about time, just because I'm prompted by the podcast title, really. A Place Untouched by Time. I don't know that I have a specific question, but time was on my mind when I saw that title, and I wondered if you had anything to say about it, and I'll keep it as open as that, really.
Before I even started work with White Teeth, I really wanted to do installation based on like the oral history like archive that we have. And I remember, like, I love old school football adverts. I wanted to make it to the point, quick. You have this information, almost like you can't not look at it. And it's so funny, I think that's all we do with White Teeth is just quick edits of like giving you information or this perspective or a story, and it's digestible. I think it's so interesting. I think I play with time in that way with White Teeth so much. And then with the archive, Alex, you always say like, don't do longer than an hour because you're going to spend ages transcribing it. But honestly, I can talk to people for hours. I'm on their time when it comes to like interviewing. So playing with those two ideas of time and working between those two, I think is definitely like my role in time for sure.
I feel like when you talk about time, like my mind goes to like the context and how it has changed, because that's also like something that I would refer as to time, not just precisely the measuring of time in itself as a unit, but how times have changed in themselves, right? Socially, culturally. And linking this to what you were talking about, language frames our way of thinking. That's just how it goes, right? So when we talk about times and language and the changes, I've been thinking a lot about this word expat versus the word immigrant. It pisses me off. It really does. It just makes me think, how are you different from an immigrant then? In the context of the time conversation that we're having, these times allow for these new categories to emerge and describe a different experience of class, a different experience of opportunities, a different experience of migration journeys in themselves. And I'm like, a lot of the projects, even at university level, within established institutions, they are using this expat narrative and rhetoric, which I think is so damaging, because it makes a distinction between legitimate and worthy immigrants and those who are not as valued. Right? So I always make a point of calling myself proudly an immigrant, because I think that carries so much strength and inspires others also to recognize where we're standing and who we are without having to comply with the world's needs to generate new scapegoats to justify the horrors that are happening. They're just dividing us, right? Instead of like pointing at the structural problems that are happening and that are not allowing for everyone to have a dignified existence. So when you talk about time, I also think of how the discourses have changed to justify the petty interest of a few. Yeah, that's what I think about when I think about time and language.
And ironically, that dynamic that you're talking about is a constant, but the language is able to update and evolve itself almost constantly. And that distinction you're making, immigrants and expats, is one example of how today that division is being sown. Often the way in which immigration is justified, if it is at all, is on what an immigrant can contribute or a migrant can contribute to a particular society. And even those who are anti-immigration might go as far as to say, well, if they do this and this, then those people are good. Which is obviously not a framework that I think anyone here would agree with. Nevertheless, I was still thinking about, again, returning to the archives and what we ask of the people contained with them and even ask communities now, and thinking about this question of the future and Sheffield going forward in the future. It sort of, to me, bumps heads with this idea of contribution, because I think one of the things that Ella with the Bantu Archive and our experience with DIG, the everydayness, as I said, is what's interesting, not really a contribution. And you said something about dignity. People all deserve dignity, and external contribution isn't a factor in that. That's a right. So I'm wondering, thinking about the current state of Sheffield, the particular time that we're in, there's a lot of anti-immigrant rhetoric. Nevertheless, there are a range of different communities who have been in Sheffield for a long time that are coming in more recently. So the future will look different as a result of that. Our mere presence here is going to shift how Sheffield is over the decades and centuries. And I wondered if we could just talk about that a little bit, the role that we might play in this archival work, and that the communities that we're looking to serve might play in building that future.
When I first came to Sheffield, I didn't know anyone. It was very scary at first to try to start engaging, because it's inconvenient putting yourself in that situation. It makes you uncomfortable at first. But I think that's very much needed in a world that wants us divided, and changing that narrative and building community without having to depend on anyone's permission or anyone else giving you funding for it. I find that inspiring, and I think that that's a horizon that we can aspire to. Please tell me if I'm wrong in my perception, but I feel like we tend to just interact with people who share the same identity traits as ourselves, because it's more comfortable and it's easier to relate to those people. But we need more exchange, in my opinion, more spaces of convergence where we could talk about our differences, but also talk about how our differences make us similar. I don't know how you see it, Ella.
I think two things. I think Sheffield's changed a lot post-COVID, for sure. I think it's way more expensive than it used to be. You can see how gentrified it's getting, for sure. That really scares me. You can see how different things have propped up, especially in the last 5 years, so quickly. And I think that really impinges on this idea of communal space. Back to archiving, I remember Cheryl said to me, loads of people come into the archive and be like, can I find a photo of this? Because it's, I don't know, it might be a building, etc., because it's got knocked down or it's changed in so many years that they want to see it because the landscape's changing, and that really stuck with me. And I've just thought there's so many things in Sheffield that have slowly like got disintegrated, but also at the same time I do think there's a good energy here for sure, and there's good people. I think space is so important, but there's people who take up space that is also just as important. I hope we can influence the city in a way that we should. I think if you look at the history of Sheffield, it was called like the Socialist Republic of South Yorkshire for like years, because there was an element of collectivisation in there, and I really think we need that more than ever.
In the 70s, the trade unions, both in Rotherham and in Sheffield, they displayed a lot of solidarity and allowed a lot of people exiled from the 73 coup in Chile to come to Sheffield, and that generated the Chilean Solidarity Network, and that gave way to creating a Cuban Solidarity Network and a Nicaraguan Solidarity Network. When you create something with, as you say, like-minded people and with their hearts in the right place, it just inspires others to do the same thing, and we need a little bit more of that here in Sheffield, I think.
What you've touched on there as well is something that's important to dig, which is that working class solidarity which cuts through certainly national lines, and is something that the originals of Dig Where You Stand comes from a text written in the 70s by a Swedish writer, Sven Lindqvist, and it was all about trying to encourage working people working in factories to take an interest in their own heritage, with the view that it would be a point of connection with other workers in other countries, and it would help kind of propel a socialist movement in Europe, and it became the name for a socialist movement in Europe. And you mentioned the really vibrant, long-standing Chilean history in Sheffield, and it makes me think more then about Sheffield and its role in global struggles now and moving forward. In Dig, we've come to talking about it as outer-national solidarity. One of the things that we've been really wrestling with is how we position ourselves outside of national lines, and I think when you're doing heritage and archival work in Britain, there's a real pressure to kind of fit within an overarching British narrative that you kind of spice up a little bit. You know, you kind of add that diversified factor, so the colours are a bit different, but ultimately the politics and the perimeters are the same. And how do you dismantle that and think more broadly about connection across class and other lines and points of struggle? And obviously Sheffield has been a very vocal supporter of the pro-Palestinian movement, and others more recently. We're talking about migrants being in Sheffield, and obviously there's potential in that to strengthen our points of connection with other nations and other struggles, because all of our lines as members of a diaspora cut way beyond the British shores.
We keep thinking in terms of state nations, right? We think those national borders as if they mean anything nowadays anymore, because we have multinational companies. It's the corporate capture of the state, essentially. And when we understand that framework, we're going to realize that we're all connected. And we start connecting the economic framework with how it's affecting our world climate-wise and how it has an impact directly in the individuals here. Of course, we're going to be moved in a more collaborative way, because we're going to understand that it's not just about us here. Everything is connected. And I think we're missing that perception and that awareness of interconnectedness. As immigrants, we come from different backgrounds. We come from different cultures. There's a lot of knowledge there that tends to be dismissed just because it hasn't gone through higher education institutions. You know what I mean? So part of the archival work to do, I think, is unearthing those stories, giving that knowledge the place that it deserves, because there are answers there to the problems that we're facing here in Sheffield and elsewhere in the world. The answers are there. What we're lacking is the organization, thinking in broader terms of how we can organize ourselves and our communities, and the links that we can create with other people organizing themselves in different latitudes. Imagine new realities. Who says this is it? Sparta and Rome perished, right? Who's to say that this is it? I think that's the point of community also, right? It's not just about, oh, I know all of these people, but what are we doing to support one another? What are we doing with the resources that we have at hand? And luckily in Sheffield, we have loads of green spaces and green areas that we need to use for the common good.
That's gorgeous. I was just conscious of the time for...
So am I. I mean, you have a way of speaking, Alex, that always feels like you are giving the final thoughts because it's so rounded and so complete in itself. You're leaving it open for the others. You speak in a very well-rounded way and again, Sam Holland was totally right.
I hope that's not the equivalent of in a conference when someone says, I've got a question, and it's actually just a comment.
No, not at all. It's just because you contextualize your point so well that it feels so relevant. The choice of words and the way they flow, they have that quality of final thought. So I finish every episode of this giving the final thoughts to whomever wants to say something that they haven't said yet, or that complements something that has been said or it was not addressed fully. It's absolutely your choice who speaks. I'm going to shut up. And in fact, I'm impressed that I've been really quiet. I'm really happy to have been quiet to listen to all of you. So to have given the space for all of you to express yourselves. And it was beautifully guided again by you, Alex. So I'm really grateful for that. So whoever wants to say something as a final thought, I will use it. So don't think that I'm going to edit it out. So.
I think back to what we're saying is like talking about the interconnectivity between Sheffield, I guess, and like the international world. I think archives at its best, they are toolkits, like you said, Alex. We're so lucky in Sheffield. I think there's a lot of nuance, but there's so many great movements that either like birthed here or really took centre stage in like the 80s, alongside like people who came here, made an imprint, or Sheffield affected them and they took that into their work. As a final thought, I think if even at the least going into like archives or archival spaces or researching, it's not a thing of the past. It really is like building a collective future at times, or even like your own future or your own identity. I don't think anyone should ever be intimidated by an archival space, even though it definitely has that, and it definitely is almost like made for you to feel like that. I think we're all above those sort of systems, and we should just definitely like act with care and act with love and get people to come together to kind of do it.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay, thank you all. Unless...
Can I just volunteer myself for the final thought?
I think so.
Oh.
Well, as soon as I made eye contact,
I know, I thought I'll let go.
Thank you.
The Matter of Migration is a Frontier Media production, co-produced by Arts on the Run. Recorded at Springtime Studios in Sheffield, UK. Engineered by Ricardo Lourinho, edited and mixed at Audio Vault Casa Premium, with sound design by myself, and final mastering at Rickmore Audio. This podcast and accompanying installation have been supported using public funding by the Arts Council of England, Sheffield City Council and Sheffield Town Trust. Special thanks to Migration Matters Festival and all the community spaces that have kindly hosted the pod.